Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. I'm recording this introduction August 30th, 2018, but it's an introduction to a podcast that I recorded in Portland, Oregon on August 17th, 2018. I cannot be more excited to introduce this interview. It is an interview of two very, very special people, Jill Searle and Katie Searle. And the title of this episode is Responding to Tragedy with Grace and Resilience. I don't want to give away too much about this interview, but what I will say is that Jill Searle was an amazing, beautiful Mormon woman raised in the Mormon church in the 60s. And she also identified internally as lesbian. She had many close female friends who she was very attracted to, but because she was a good Mormon girl, she married a Mormon boy, served a mission and married a Mormon boy, so entered into a mixed orientation marriage in the 70s and early 80s as a devout Mormon woman. She had several children with this husband, and at some point realized that she was lesbian and needed to end the marriage. She ended her marriage amicably, and then found the love of her life, which was another lesbian Mormon returned missionary. Because of laws that did not support marriage equality, she actually had to marry or enter into civil services 5 different times with her wife. But eventually she was married. And ironically, for the good of her children, she supported her children being raised LDS, even though she was a lesbian woman who had left the church. That's going to be part one of this amazing epic story. And Jill just deserves her own admiration and support for this amazing story of her journey. Part two of the story is just as fascinating and epic, if not more. One of Jill's children is Katie Searle Williams, who was raised LDS by an orthodox LDS father and then two lesbian ex-Mormon mothers in Oregon. She ended up marrying Nathan Williams, and together they started a world-famous magazine called Kinfolk, and many of you will have heard of Kinfolk magazine. And so Katie and Nathan, build this amazing magazine, get married, and then get pregnant. And this story, the second part of the story, is how Katie Searle dealt with this epic tragedy. She gets pregnant, and 6 months into that pregnancy is forced to make the tough decision with her husband, Nathan, to terminate the pregnancy of their first child. In the subsequent events following that termination, Nathan opens up to Katie about both being an alcoholic and about being gay. And so it talks about how Katie dealt with not only losing a child, but also having her husband come out to her as gay after being raised by a mother who had to come out to her husband as being lesbian, and also how they dealt with Nathan's struggle with alcoholism. This resulted, and all this information came out while Katie was pregnant with her and Nathan's second child. And then it follows on with how Katie made the very difficult decision to divorce her husband, Nathan, or they made that decision together. And then how Katie moved back to the United States and has been rebuilding her life outside the LDS church as a single mom, now that their beautiful child, V, I believe is the child's name, has been born. It's an epic story of tragedy, but also of grace and resilience. The reason why I'm recording an introduction to this separately is that in the very beginning, the audio wasn't quite great, and you're going to hear my audio be a little bit echoey. We figured out audio when we're in studio here in Salt Lake City, but we were traveling, we were on location in a wonderful supporter's house, and as a result, we didn't have the best audio at first, but the audio corrects and gets better. And so please hold on, and you're going to love this interview. So please check it out. And here now is my interview with Jill and Katie Searle that was recorded in August of 2018. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the interview. Jill and Katie Searle, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So, I've been wanting to do this for a while. Is there anything I got wrong, Jill, in the introduction?
No, I think you summed it up pretty good.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for joining us. And Katie, anything you want to correct or you want to share what it's like to be on Mormon Stories?
It's pretty surreal, yeah. I may not listen to it. This episode, I'll keep listening. But.
Did I get everything right in the intro?
You did, thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just dive in because this really is an epic and an important story. So, Jill, let's start with you. Raised LDS, talk about that.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Ogden, Utah, into a family 6 generations Mormon on both sides, a lot of Mormon heritage. Grew up with a lot of pioneer stories, listening to them, reading them, talking to my grandparents about our ancestors. I remember a room in my grandmother's house that had all the pictures, big portrait-sized pictures of our ancestors. And as a child, that was pretty scary to be sleeping in that room. And it was always cold because she always had it shut down. But it always that was kind of my introduction to our ancestors and early in life, and they continued to be very important. One of my ancestors, John Linford, who's my great-great-great-grandfather, Katie's great-great-great-great-grandfather, he came from England and then traveled with the Willie Handcart Company. He died at the Sweetwater Crossing, and his wife and children continued on. His wife wasn't a member of the church coming from England, but she came because of her family. And this was very hard for her. It wasn't her faith. She had a lot of her own trials through that, but she continued and landed in Utah with her other children, one of which was my great-great-grandfather. Brigham Young then baptized her, and then she married, what was his name? Rich. His last name was Rich. Anyway, one of the big rich people, Joseph Rich, and into a polygamist marriage. So I didn't come from those polygamous lines, but there is that element there. And then there's just many, many, many more pioneer stories. I think growing up in Ogden was a very safe place, if you don't consider the sexual predators in the neighborhood. But we used to just be outside playing constantly. We were outdoors with our friends, playing kick the can, hide and seek, till all hours of the night. Everybody just kind of watched out for us, took care of us. I was raised by a community. My family of origin was not particularly traditional Mormon. My father was alcoholic, and amongst many other shortfalls of his, my mother worked full-time, so I had a lot of time on my own with both parents being gone during the day, and I used to just spend a lot of time with my friends and their families, kind of adopted a lot of the other Mormon parents as kind of my surrogate parents. I remember one of the points in my life, I think, where things kind of shifted a little bit for me was when I was 8 years old. I remember being in Sunday school class, and the Sunday school teacher was teaching a lesson on the priesthood in the home. And I remember her saying, if there's not a strong priesthood leader in your home, you do not have a godly home, you do not have a worthy home, and your home will always be in chaos. And I remember as an 8-year-old thinking, well, wait a minute, I knew my father didn't fit that picture, so I immediately, in that moment, discounted him, basically. I think that's where, in my 8-year-old mind, I decided my father wasn't really worthy of my respect, but that I still needed to save him somehow. I needed to help him see that he needed to do better so that he could be a worthy priesthood leader in our home. And I kind of role reversal there, where I became his savior, so to speak. And then not long after that, also when I was
kids shouldn't have to kind of be a parent, right?
Right. An 8-year-old shouldn't be worried about saving their family, but I was very indoctrinated even at that early age. I was also at 8 with my mom. I remember sitting in the car under the carport and her telling me while she was crying about my dad cheating on her. Again, I was 8, so why she decided to have a conversation with her 8-year-old daughter, I'm not sure, but she was going through a lot herself. I remember her showing me notes that she had found in his pockets and just not knowing what to do and just sobbing. And it was also in that moment that there was a role reversal there where I had to save my father, but I had to take care of my mother. Kind of from that point forward, I never really felt the same sort of respect or regard for my parents that I think outside of, if I wasn't in the church with the indoctrination that I had, I think I could have had a much richer, fuller relationship with both my parents rather than a judgmental one or thinking I had some duty towards them and our forever family. I really think that the forever families are forever doctrine is probably the most harmful teaching that the church has. And I think it's...
Because instead of just enjoying your family, making the most of it, you were always viewing them as dysfunctional and as problematic, right, and as some project to fix. Is that what
right.
you're saying?
For me, that's what it was. And also later in my story as an adult, feeling that pressure on myself as I made choices for myself. Right. I don't think there's too many families that meet that criteria, the strict criteria of being a forever family. There's always somebody outside that box that doesn't fit, that family's going to lose, that family has to pray for, hope for, and I think they do lose now. They lose the current relationship that they could have. I think I lost an opportunity to enjoy my parents and respect my parents more than I did.
Okay, so how does your story continue?
So I think the next big point was when I was 12. Again, running around the neighborhood, I was a tomboy. I was always a tomboy.
Is that what you're referred to as?
Yeah. It's kind of being gay and young in Ogden, Utah in the 60s. There wasn't a lot of information. I didn't know I was different. I didn't know what was normal. I was just being me, climbing trees, chasing the girls with grasshoppers and, playing Mission Impossible and Cowboys with the Boys is what I enjoyed doing. So that's what I did. And out running in the neighborhood at 12, I ran into the first sexual predator who violated me. And I remember that horrible feeling of being a victim, of being in somebody else's power or control. And I remember just crying and crying until he let me go. And then I ran home. He just lived a couple of doors up. He was a grandfatherly type, lived a couple of doors up from us. We used to always play in his backyard and climb the tree, go in his house, watch cartoons. He was the candy man of the neighborhood. I remember running home and locking myself in the house. And by the time my parents got home, I was calm and settled, and I never spoke a word about that to anyone till I was 26.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I kept that under wraps and kind of kept that to myself for a long time.
What does that do to a kid?
I kind of I don't know, I got over it. I guess I had this will about me that was like, I'll prove to this man that he didn't harm me, So every time I walked by his house, I held my head up and walked past. And every time I saw him, I waved at him like, yeah, you didn't do a thing to me, I don't know, that was in my mind how I was going to deal best with it. And then at 15, I had another run-in with another sexual predator who was a member of the church. He was in the neighboring ward when we shared the building with, and so he lived close in the neighborhood as well. And that experience was more extreme and probably a little more terrifying for me. And at 15, I felt guilty. I felt like I'd done something horrible because I didn't run away, because I didn't get away. I carried a lot of guilt around with me for a few weeks. Didn't take the sacrament. I felt so. I felt so guilty. It's like, well, I can't take the sacrament. I'm not worthy. My bishop noticed that I wasn't taking the sacrament, and he said, "Anything you want to talk to me about? We can have a moment together and talk." So he lived just a few doors up. He was a Forest Service ranger. No professional training, of course. Our bishops are just people doing their best. And he called me in, and I told him, through tears, what I had done. What I had done wrong, and that I felt bad about it, and that I didn't know what to do about it. And the one thing he did right is he told me right away that it wasn't my fault. There was nothing about that experience that was my responsibility, and I was not to blame for any of that. So that made me feel better. That made me feel good.
Was there any accountability for the other person?
No. And that was, in hindsight, I look back and I think, he didn't even ask who it was. He knew it was a member of the church.
Who it was.
Yeah, I told him that he was in what ward he was in. So he knew he was a member of the church. And I told him that he was a young men's leader, and that this is kind of how the whole thing came about. So he knew there was a church connection, but he never did ask who it was. And there was never anything further done.
And you weren't out for justice. You were just trying to heal, or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pretty stalwart, pretty much a straightforward Mormon, and I did everything by the book. And so I had done what I thought I needed to do, was go to my church leader.
Why not go to your parents or the police?
I never went to my parents for anything. My parents, I was helping them. I was saving them. I was protecting them. I never went to my parents for any of those types of things. And that, too, I kept to myself till I was 26. So two things kind of buried inside that had a lot of influence on my life and who I was.
How do you think not talking about those things till you were 26 affected you? Do you have any sense or not? Some would say, well, it made you stronger, it made you more resilient, it made you tougher.
In a way, I think that's true. I think it did, because of it. The personality I have is to fight back, but it was not in a fight back to get revenge sort of a way. It was like fight back and prove to them that they haven't beat me at this, that I'm still strong, that I'm still good to go. So I kind of was in a denial about it. I know hindsight, it wasn't probably the most healthy way to deal with it, but it was how I dealt with it, was by just putting a strong face forward. And when I saw that man at church every Sunday, between the wards changing and such, and we'd always run into each other, I walked straight up to him and shook his hand. It was in a weird sort of 15-year-old way to just prove to him that he didn't hurt me.
Okay.
So can't explain that, but that's just kind of how I reacted to it. I just put it away.
Regarding your your sexuality, as a teen, did you ever become aware of sexual attractions for women? Did you ever start noticing you were really different and even, quote, sinful, or did you just not allow your brain or consciousness to even go there?
Well, again, it was 60s, 70s, growing up without a lot of information. Utah was behind the times in that regard anyway, so I really didn't know much about being gay or what that even meant. In my mind, that was just something horrible that two men might do in dark alleys and dingy places, and that it was a horrible sin and that God abhorred it. You might as well be a murderer rather than a gay person. That's all I knew about being gay. I never really thought about myself. I did start feeling attractions for girls during adolescence, and it was easy enough to explain away. Like, wow, I really feel close to this person. I feel an attraction to this person. She must be my kindred spirit. And with women, I think the lines are blurry. We are allowed to feel more for each other and to be more emotionally connected and to hold hands and to, snuggle up, and it's not necessarily frowned on or looked on as anything. And so the lines were blurry. I knew what I was feeling, but didn't know that it was wrong or didn't know that it was different. So I didn't carry around guilt about it. I did have questions like, wow, I would find myself attracted to someone, and I would just throw myself into that friendship and give them gifts and write them long notes. And I never quite got enough back from them, but still wasn't quite sure what was going on. And that just intensified as I grew older. And I just kept explaining it away. Wow, there's a lot of kindred spirits. Okay, especially when I got to BYU, I was like, whoa, all these kindred spirits. So I just kind of carried on and went on my way to when I graduated from high school.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I'll just say as a researcher, there's no data to support this, but it's just very, very common for people who aren't informed to associate sexual abuse with same-sex sexuality. If somebody were to say, oh, there we go, that's another validation of what I was taught, which is that, you're sexually abused and you become gay. How would you respond to someone who would draw that connection?
I've got a lot of friends that were sexually abused that are not gay. I've got more friends who were sexually abused that are straight and in heterosexual relationships and have worked their way back to that place. And I've got friends who are sexually abused who are gay. I think there's a lot of women, especially, I don't know if it was more so when I was young. If it was more common, I don't know. It's still very common and prevalent, obviously. But people talk about it more and people recognize it as a bad thing, that it's not to happen. And there's much more likely that a man would be held accountable for it. When I was growing up, I think it was happening and we were quiet about it. It wasn't until I was an adult that I started talking to my friends that this happened to you too, sort of a Me Too movement in a different way. So that's how I would answer that question. So.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like abuse was just going on all the time, and bishops aren't even asking who is responsible, let alone punishing people, at least in your experience. And so abuse would have been very prevalent.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
With no accountability or punishment.
Right.
Yeah, so it's
not like
a faulty assumption.
Yeah, it wasn't bad like I expected it to happen, or when it happened I felt I deserved it, or it was just a normal thing. It wasn't that normalized, but it was so that the shame of it I kept hidden, and obviously a lot of my friends did too, because it wasn't until we were adults that we actually shared those experiences and talked about it.
Now, would you have heard the anti-LGBT rhetoric of the sort of Spencer B. Kimball, Mark E. Peterson, Boyd K. Packer eras in your teen and early adult years, or did that come later?
Yes.
Miracle forgiveness too.
Right. I was the miracle forgiveness generation. Yeah, when I remember President Kimball being kind of our prophet. He was the one I had the most connection to, or most relationship to, I think. But yeah, so I do remember it being talked about, but I never related to it. I didn't even consider it was about me.
Okay, so you didn't internalize that?
No, I didn't internalize that, because that was bad and it was horrible and an aberration and a sin, and only a horrible person would be that way. And I knew I wasn't a horrible person, so I couldn't be gay.
Okay.
It didn't go together.
So how does your story advance?
So I graduated from high school. My parents divorced at the same time that I graduated from high school. I went to BYU for a couple of years. As soon as I turned 21, I'd always wanted to go on a mission. So as soon as I turned 21, I was going on a mission. I served in Taiwan and Thailand. Taiwan was a proselyting mission, and in Thailand it was working in the refugee camps with the Indochinese refugees back in Pol Pot times. That was when Pol Pot was causing his chaos. So that was an amazing experience. And that was when I got to know Marion D. Hanks, and he was kind of in charge of the whole getting the sister missionaries into the refugee camps. And the one rule was we couldn't proselyte. So that was purely that was my style of mission. Just get in there and help these people and teach them English and culture and prepare them for their country that they're going to. And that I really enjoyed that.
And he was your mission president?
He was not our mission president, no, but he was the apostle that got that whole program going and got the permissions for us to be in the camp. So it was his baby.
Okay, so all of the sort of Mormon intellectuals that I know who were around in the 60s and 70s mention him as being one of the good guys. Mm-hmm. Can you just, in 30 seconds, did you have any experiences with him where you could understand why Mormon intellectuals really liked Duff Hanks, as he was called?
Yeah. I did have those experiences with him. I do consider him one of the good guys, and that was evidence in when they made him emeritus. Proved he was one of the good guys because they pushed him out. He just always stood up for what he felt was right. I just think he was one of those who didn't toe the line just to toe the line.
Was he an intellectual?
Spoke his mind. I don't know I don't know.
Experience in that way?
Well, Maxine Hanks was certainly an intellectual, and she got it from someone, right?
Is she related to him?
I believe she is.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think he was probably considered an intellectual. Certainly a do-gooder. He was into community service and loving people and charity and compassion, that kind of thing.
Okay, so you had a good mission?
Had a good mission. I was there almost 2 years because I had an extension to go to Thailand. So,
did you have any bosom buddies on your mission?
Oh, I did have, you mean attractions? I was able to put that away because I was so stalwart. I was so gung-ho. But when I got to Thailand, there was a sister missionary that there was a kindred spirit there in Thailand. So none of these relationships ever evolved to anything because I tended to always be attracted to straight women who wouldn't have even considered it an option. And I, being naive, didn't even really know what was going on anyway. It was just kindred spirit stuff going on. I always felt like, I'd always explain I'm not gay, but I can certainly understand and relate to how they feel because I feel so strongly towards some of my female friends. And that's how I kind of explained it to myself. I'm not gay, but I know how they feel because I feel that way. But so came home from my mission, went back to BYU, fell in love with a roommate there, and then it just amped up. Everything was just intensified, and I think I just dealt with it the same way, just kind of trying to explain it away. I did finally go to a BYU counselor and say, I think I'm gay. He said no.
What year would this have been?
This would have been 81, okay. 82.
Okay.
And this BYU counselor says, no, you're not gay. You just don't like men because they've been so rotten to you all your life, So I was like, I knew it. I knew I wasn't gay. So I kind of put it away for a while more. My relationship with my roommate was, for me, so intense. Every thought was about her. Every song on the radio was about her. She would go out with boys. I would become envious and jealous, and I would do what I could do to destroy that relationship. Bad talk the guy or, whatever. It was just, it was intense on my part. For her, she, and we used to joke, she'd say, too bad if you were a man, we could get married, because we're so close. And we had this closeness. So it was still not gay, but gay, and she had no desire to have a relationship either, but we were close. And I think that was about the time I met my husband, Brent, was when I was having this trial in my own mind with my roommate. And it was coincidental because his birthday was the same day as hers, so this was a sign from heaven.
That's first.
Yeah, well, at least he's got the same birthday as her, and she likes him, so she thinks he's a good guy, and he was such a good guy. I think what I was attracted to Katie's father was he's all about service. He's all about doing the right thing. He's just a good human. He was smart. He wanted to fix the problems of the world. He was always on the right side of the social issues, or the
underdog.
left side. Yeah, he was always fighting for the underdog, and that appealed to me. That's what attracted me to him. That's what made it okay. Third date, he proposed in the Mormon way, and then he said, and how he proposed was we went up to Silver Falls or Bridal Falls or whatever that is there in Provo. And he said, I'm going to be graduating and moving to the East Coast. Do you want to come with me? Sure. Sure, why not? I don't have anything better to do. And you're a good person. You have the same birthday as my roommate, so let's do it. So we were engaged from that point. And then things got intense for me. That was when I was 26. That's when the sexual abuse all came back up. And that's when because I was having so much struggle in my intimacy with Brent, I couldn't be intimate. I hated it. Not only, it would repulse me. And it wasn't like he was trying to do anything wrong or inappropriate or anything like that. I just couldn't deal with it. I'd always find myself running home, leaving my dates early, going home and snuggling up next to my roommate where everything was okay. And I knew this wasn't normal, that I should be more happy, that I should be more wanting to be with Brent. And we're getting married after all, There wasn't the excitement and the flutter I even went and talked to Marion D. Hanks at that point and says, I just don't know that I love him and that this is going to work. And he gave me long stories and talked me back into my engagement. I became depressed, and I told him about the sexual abuse, and that was our answer to why we were having trouble. Kind of that same thing you talked about. Well, of course, if you've had sexual abuse, you're going to have trouble in intimacy. But I was able to be more comfortable with the intimacy with my roommate and my female friends, but I was not at all comfortable with that. So there was one night I remember that I just want to touch on, try and get through my story without taking 3 hours. I became suicidal just in this moment. And I remember waiting for Brent to leave. He was over at our house, and I said, in my mind, I'm thinking, as soon as he leaves, I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to end my life. I said, I know this will hurt some people, but it will just be temporary. They'll hurt for a few days, and then they'll move on, and their lives will be better because I won't be burdening them, because I was just so confused about what was going on. Not being able to connect with Brent like I felt I should. Everything I was doing I felt like I was doing the right thing. Why isn't it working out? Brent just stayed. I don't know if he sensed something that night, but he stayed and he stayed and he stayed. And I kept thinking, when he leaves, he stayed and he stayed and he stayed. And he stayed until I was just too tired to commit suicide. At that point, he left, and I was like, not going to happen tonight. So, and then by that time, too, it had passed, and I don't think I had that strong of a feeling after that again. After that, it became kind of like what I call the Mormon attempt, a Mormon suicidal, where it's like you're driving down the road and you wish that semi-truck would hit you, or you're still wanting your life to end, but you want it to end in a way that's not your fault at all. The martyr mentality of it's got to be over, because we got married, we moved to Virginia, we had our first 2 children, Katie and her older brother, and I poured all my love and affection into them, and that was my way then of dealing and coping, because I had a lot of love to give. And Brent and I had a good relationship. It that didn't have the strong sexual attractions and the things like that, but it was a good relationship. We were good friends, and we were good parents. We had the 2 older ones, and we moved back to Washington State and then to Oregon. And once we settled in Oregon, that was when we had our 3rd child. So we had 3 children. So 10 years of marriage, good years, rough years. I sought counseling. We had a lot of discussions about our sexual intimacy and the problems there. I sought out counseling, trying to figure things out. And we had a good friend, mostly Brent's good friend. He was a missionary companion of Brent's and a roommate of Brent's. And he had come out to Brent a few years previous as gay. And he brought us a book. He came to visit once and he brought us a book. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a book called Peculiar People. And
Bob Reese, right?
Yeah, written for gay people, like that tells the stories of people coming out, Mormons who've come out. Then it tells it from the perspective of their parents or spouse, and then it tells it from the perspective of professionals. Anyway, he brought this book out in a way for us to help understand him and kind of know what he had been going through. Well, I read it first, and I was highlighting things and dog-earing pages. I could relate to like almost everything in the book, especially the women's accounts. That book was yellow and ragged by the time I got done with it. And by the time I gave it to Brent, he was like, "Why is everything highlighted?" Help me understand. So that was, after reading that book, I was actually able to say to myself, "Jill, you're gay." And I wrote it down. I actually put pen to paper and wrote it down. And that was my coming out to myself. And in that very moment, it was kind of like a cleansing. It's hard to explain what happened in my being, but I felt like all this icky, gucky, black stuff just cleared out of my self. And it was just filled with light, and everything made sense. My whole life made sense, All these kindred spirits made sense now. And I felt so happy and so good, but yet at the same time so scared. Like, what am I going to do now? Now I've got to face this. I have 3 kids. I have a husband. I'm supposed to be happily married forever. So now what? So Brent came home and I escaped to the beach and did a lot of thinking. Came back and Brent was the first person I came out to. And he was just kind. Sorry. I've told this story a lot of times and I haven't cried, but it was a difficult moment in my life where everything just made sense, but I just didn't know what to do. And when I told Brent, he didn't freak out. I don't know what he was going through. He was having his own experience, I'm sure, but he didn't freak out or anything. He just held me. I cried all night. And he just held me. We didn't talk. And then in the morning, he said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I can only see one option. Still very narrow, still very Mormon. It's like I can only see one option. And we're going to stay together for the kids. That's what we do. Because we're a forever family. Families are forever. And with this new knowledge and understanding, we decided we'd go forward and make it work. And that lasted a whole 9 months. I had a lot of ups and downs and little anxiety and a lot of things going on, a lot of depression and a lot of problems there, and trying to, work with the kids and carry on with life with a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old, just kind of keep things going. And I would go to church with this big dark secret and this big black spider inside of me just eating me up, and just with this feeling of if anybody knew this horrible thing about me, they would hate me. That's just what I felt. And it wasn't true, of course, but that's just how I felt. And I'd go to Relief Society and I'd hear, this is when there was a lot of talk about gays and the LGBT community. So this would have been 94-ish. So I'd sit in Relief Society and I'd sit in Sacrament meeting and I'd sit in these meetings and I'd hear these people who were supposed to be kind and going on and on about gays. I remember sitting in a Relief Society meeting where one sister stood and during one lesson and said that if she knew that somebody was gay, they would not be welcome in her home. And the ironic thing was Brent and I were going to her home for dinner that very next week. And I kept the appointment, kind of a secret spite, to spite her, to be gay and be in her home. But I told a few people, they were very kind, and it was good. But eventually I couldn't deal with it anymore. It seemed like everything had changed for me, and Brent's life was just going on normal. He didn't have to make any big adjustments, though I'm sure there was a lot going on for him too. And then I decided there was another option, and we would divorce.
Do you want to tell the Packer story really quick?
Oh, yes.
Was that out of sequence or?
So during this 9-month period of resolution and trying to stay strong and be Mormon, and I'd had all these questions. I mean, there'd been 10 years of questioning going on up to this point. I'd pretty much tossed out a lot of the tenets of the gospel as being, hogwash or folklore or this or that, and I had very little left in my box of what I could really believe in. But
you were reading Sunstone magazine?
Yeah, we were
right?
going to Sunstone symposiums, reading Sunstone magazines. So we were in the feminist movement. We were trying to help different women in our ward who were in abusive situations. There was it seemed a lot of women that were struggling with that, had an abusive husband or to their children or to them, and we were reaching out to them. So we were feminists, we were intellectuals, we were all these things, but we decided to stay thinking, believing Mormons. Got sitting in the regional conference right next to my 3 lovely kids, and my husband, and in my best church dress, and Boyd K. Packer was speaking. It was televised. Boyd K. Packer spoke his 3 greatest enemies of the church talk. And I'm sitting there, and he says, the 3 greatest enemies of the church are intellectuals, feminists, and homosexuals. And I thought, well, there you go. Strike 3, I'm out. I had no idea I was the greatest enemy of the church. Does the greatest enemy of the church, give all of their time and their talents and their treasure to a church all their life? That wasn't how I felt the greatest enemy of the church was. But here I was being told by Boyd K. Packer that
Triple threat.
A triple threat, big triple threat. So I decided in that moment there was no more. I was done. I was gone. And I went home from that meeting, took off my garments, never went back to church after that. And then it was soon after that Brent and I did decide to divorce. And that was difficult, and I went through a little bit of had a nervous breakdown during all of that, because there was a faith transition going on. I was leaving the church, I was leaving my marriage, I was going out and trying to find a job and trying to be ready to continue to parent the kids separate from Brent and make this work. And I just had a nervous breakdown.
And that's mid-90s, right?
Right.
Was it pre-Ellen? Was it?
This was exactly around the time Ellen came out publicly. So.
Ellen DeGeneres.
Yeah, Ellen DeGeneres came out.
What does she mean to you?
She's my hero. She's my best friend. She doesn't know it. I always tell my kids, if she met me, yeah, she would like me.
What'd she mean to you at the time?
I was watching, that was when her first sitcom was out, and I always thought she was hilarious. I always liked her. But I always thought, she's got to be gay. I'd watch that, and I'd watch her. And this was when I had come out. And so gaydar was sharp, and I was thinking, she's got to be gay, got to be gay, got to be gay. And then she came out publicly, and it just meant a lot to me. I mean, I think she was the poster child for a lot of us, and poster lesbian for a lot of us who were struggling at the time. And she was somebody people liked, So many people liked her. She was gay. And so she went through a lot, though,
Lost her contract.
Yeah. But she came back strong from that. And so I went after leaving the Mormon church, flung myself into the metaphysical world. Went to a place called the Living Enrichment Center and got all caught up in that. Got a job there at the Living Enrichment Center and worked there for 7 years, and became very involved in the woo-woo world, I call it, and the
New Age spirituality.
New Age spirituality. Gene Houston, Marianne Williamson, all those people would come and speak at the Living Enrichment Center, and so I got to meet them personally and talk with them and absorb their teachings and stuff. So I got really into that, because as a Mormon, it's easy to get really into, and that kind of fell away, and then I kind of came back to center and decided I didn't want any sort of organized religion. That I probably lean towards not believing in God now at this point in my life, but I don't know that there's not a God. I'm not going there. I just kind of decided to let the mystery be. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to be a good person no matter what, so it doesn't really matter. I do think about it, research it, listen to people. I find it very interesting to study and hear what other people think, what other people's spirituality is. That's kind of where I'm at, just more interested than anything. So, yeah. But then that kind of brings me quickly to where I met Susie, my wife now. I was in Portland, kind of on my own. I'd met a group of women through the Living Enrichment Center that were very supportive of me, and they were, that was helpful to have their experience and see them be successful. And this thing called affirmation came up, and I thought, what is this affirmation thing? They were having a big international or national conference in Seattle, and a couple of friends wanted me to go, but they weren't going, so it was going to be me going by myself, which didn't seem very appealing to me. But I talked myself into going, and I went up on my own. And then meantime, while that's happening, Susie's in New York with her gay boyfriend. She had a lot of boys that she hung out with that was their affirmation group there in New York, and they wanted her to go to Seattle. And she was like, no, I don't want to go. And then they pestered as any good gay man can. And she said, finally, okay, I'll go if I can find a really cheap airfare, but it has to be under this amount. And they found her that airfare. So she went. So we both ended up in Seattle at this Mormon lesbian gay conference. And I walked into the first meal, didn't know where to sit. It seemed intimidating to walk in, not knowing anyone. And there was a table full of women, and there was a seat available there, but I wasn't quite ready to just dive in like that. So there was this other table with all these gay men and Susie. And so that seems more comfortable for me right now. So I just walked over there. And those boys, they got up, they found me a chair, they ushered me in, and they grilled me, and they made sure they vetted me, made sure I was available, that I was suitable. And then let Susie and I talk, and they matched us up. And from there it just stuck. We were inseparable during the conference. And then she went back to New York, and I went back to Portland, and we kept in touch, and I flew to New York, and she flew here, back and forth a few times. She met the kids, and that was in August of 95, and she moved out by Christmas of 95. She'd moved out and come back. Moved out, meaning moved from New York to Portland after being in New York for 10 years. She had also joined the church. She wasn't raised Mormon, but went to BYU because friends talked her into it, and was baptized there at BYU. Then went on a mission to New Zealand and came home. And so I got my return missionary. I did settle in with my second return missionary. And we've been together now for 23 years. And we've been married 5 times. So.
What do you mean?
Well, when the kids were still young, again, about the same age, like maybe 4, 7, and 9, Susie and I had a commitment ceremony at the Living Enrichment Center, which was this New Thought church that I was going to, and a reverend named Sally Rudis married us and gave us a civil union. It was big. It was big. A lot of people came. It was a big celebration, and that was great, and that's what started that's what I consider our anniversary, our legitimate, real anniversary. And then, of course, that was just a civil union. And then along the light way, Multnomah County at one point in time made gay marriage legal, where they were giving marriage licenses to gay couples during that whole Prop 8 and that whole prior to that. This was all happening in different states and counties. And so we went up to Portland and got married. We got our license, and then we went to the Living Enrichment Center and had Sally Rudis sign that and marry us again. So she got to do the second one as well. And then that got revoked. They sent us a letter with our $16 or whatever back and said, sorry, you're not married. I kept that certificate. We'll have to sell it on eBay or something. But then domestic partnership was legalized, so we went and did that first thing. That was a third marriage. And then Prop 8 happened, was horrible. And then this one man, one woman thing happened in Oregon. It was horrible. It was so personal.
What is that?
During George Bush's second run for president, there was also a measure put on the Oregon ballot, one man, one woman, to amend the Constitution that marriage could only take place between one man and one woman. A very personal battle there. I mean, it just felt awful to have the people voting on my rights and our rights to be married or choose to be married. And it passed. And so it passed, but they said, okay, you can have domestic partnership. So that was the concession. So we went and got our domestic partnership, and then Obama came along, and Obama just decided to make it legal across the country, and he blew away everybody. He just made me so happy. I just love him. I miss him.
Along with the Supreme Court, right? Yeah,
along with the Supreme Court, and then so we were the first ones in our county to get our marriage license. And then we were afraid still, a little afraid that they might revoke that again, that they might do a Prop 8 thing where they say, okay, if you did get married, you're good to go, but no more gay marriages. So we decided to have a friend of ours who had his internet license to marry us. So we had our marriage license, he married us, he signed our marriage license. It was witnessed by two people. And we didn't really tell anybody about that. We kind of kept that under cover because we had our big wedding planned. And then so a few months later in August or July, we had our marriage ceremony, our legal marriage. And that was the fifth time we got married.
So to kind of close your first segment of this interview, you talked early on about soulmates or bosom buddies. What was the term you used?
Yeah.
Of the early friendships you had?
Yeah, what did I call them? Kindred spirits. Kindred spirits.
What was it like to finally find a kindred spirit you could actually be with, and to contrast that with what you were feeling with your husband, who you loved, but
right.
What was it like to finally be able to be partnered with someone you loved fully?
It was amazing. You go through your life thinking you understand love and that you think you understand happiness and good feelings, and then you really find it and you realize you didn't have it. And it was amazing to be able to fully love Susie and not carry the guilt. By this time I was way past the guilt of the Mormon church, and I could love her completely. And we had the same language because we were both ex-Mormons, and so we could share that and relate to that and work through those things together. And our relationship was full and complete, and she fit right in with the family. The kids loved her from the beginning, and they were still little, so they could accept her. They didn't have any big hang-ups or anything like that, and she just immediately became part of our family. And became another mother to the kids. And Brent was accepting of our relationship to an extent. There were periods of his growing through that too.
Because he remained a devout Mormon.
Right.
And so for him to say, in the 90s or early 2000s, I'm okay with my ex-wife and her lesbian partner
having anything to do with my
raising
kids.
The children. That's probably wasn't normal back then, and today is still not a possibility for so many in or out of Mormonism.
Right. But he was a compassionate man, and so as a human, he could accept it. I think as a Mormon, he had his problems with it, that he had to kind of overcome and learn And I think he grew a lot
Yeah,
too.
he's come a long way.
He's come a long way. He's now an advocate for gays and lesbians, and he's still active in the church. But he's very supportive of Susie and I, and he's always expressing his gratitude, his love for us. So.
And again, when you think about your mental health, your happiness, your joy levels with your husband, your ex-husband, and then you think about what it's been like with your current partner, how is it different for you? If you had to summarize the difference of what it's meant to you to be with someone that really fit.
Well, with Brent, there was a good relationship, but when it came to the sexual intimacy, I not only was not attracted to him, but I was averse to the sexual intimacy. It was repulsive to me. Brent wasn't repulsive to me, but the sexual part of our relationship was repulsive to me. It was difficult for me. I hated it. With Susie, it's easy. Everything's easy. With Susie from the get-go, as a good person, as a human, I never felt a need to be anybody but who I am. I was just always comfortable being me around her, and she always made me laugh. And those were two things that I just knew we were going to be together for.
And that's actually not sexual. That's just compatibility.
And that was compatibility, and that came first. That emotional connection came first. And
was that maybe even more important than the sex, or not? Or
well, I had that with Brent. I had that emotional intimacy, but it was the completeness of what I had with Susie.
It felt complete.
Complete, and being able to give her everything. And offer everything that comes with a marriage and everything that comes with love in a relationship, and not feeling repulsed, not having to hold back, not feeling it obligatory, And
that's lasted for you, that importance remains. Mm-hmm. And if a church leader were to counsel a young woman, maybe as you were, and just say, life isn't about sex. Sex is just one part of us. We're much more than our sexual identity. So marry a man, find joy. Yes, it'll be your cross to bear, but life is about more than sex, and you'll be blessed in the hereafter for your sacrifice. If you then had a chance to talk to that young woman, not to argue, but just to share your perspective to her, what would you say to her?
I would say it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because there are demands in a marriage. There's that other person's going to have needs. You're going to have needs, and he's not going to meet your needs. You're not going to meet his needs. And that is a very important part of the relationship. And if you don't keep that part of the relationship nourished, other parts of your relationship suffer and fall apart. And you do start to argue. You do start to not want to be around each other, and problems do crop up other than that. It doesn't work. I have a half-brother who is gay. He got married, had 2 children, gave it a good go. Didn't work. It just doesn't work that way. A nephew who's gay. I have a great niece who's gay. There's a lot of gay in my family.
Mine too.
Yeah, so there's just, when you have Mormon families that are huge, you're going to have gay in those families.
Lots of gay.
Lots of gay. One other thing, when I was excommunicated, I think.
You were excommunicated? I
was excommunicated, not for years. Susie and I had been together at this point for a lot of years. It was probably 2001, 2002. We were in McMinnville. The kids were in high school by this time, junior high and high school. They were 50-50 with me and Brent. Things were very good. They enjoyed being at both homes. They enjoyed 4 parents, raising them well. And I got a call from the bishop clerk saying, the bishop wants to talk to you. I'm like, by this time I haven't been to church for, say, 15 years. I'm like, what about? Would you like to come to his office, or would you like him to come to your home? I said, I guess come to my house. I mean, that's what I said. I wish I had said, there's no need, I don't want to talk to the bishop, but I didn't. Still trained to obey. So he came knocking at the door. This was during the Multnomah County, you can get married now, period. And Susie and I had just gotten married. And he came to the door and he said, could you come out on the porch? I mean, I just spent 45 minutes cleaning my living room for this man. Why don't you come in? Well, I'd be more comfortable if you came out on the porch. Then I remembered, oh yeah, he's by himself. He can't come in to my home because I'm a single woman. And then, so I went out on the porch just to make it easier for him. And he proceeded to excommunicate me. And he was a very kind man. I could tell he was uncomfortable. I could tell he didn't want to do this, that he was doing it because...
He did it on the porch.
It was obligation. He did it on the porch. Because it was recently passed that if you're a woman and didn't hold a priesthood, you didn't have to have a court. When Susie got excommunicated, she had to have a court. But times changed, and now if you're a woman, you don't have to have a court. You can just be excommunicated on your front porch. Very convenient. So he said I don't even know if that I agree with this, but I'm going to excommunicate you because you're living in a way that's contrary to the teachings of the church. And if you're not willing to change that, then we'll carry on with the excommunication. So I said, well, go for that. Let's do that. And he left, and he apologized again. And then he said, your kids are great. You've done a great job with your kids. You're welcome to church anytime. I'm like, bye. And he left. And then I waited and waited for a letter to come. Nothing came. And I found out that bishop had been released. What really bothered me, so I don't know, a few weeks later, maybe a month or two later, a new bishop came in, new sheriff in town. This one was a father of a friend of my son's, and he just dropped in. I don't know what it is about Mormons just dropping in. Home teachers, they just drop in. Bishops, they just drop in. And so he came with one of his counselors and knocked on the door. This time they came into the house because there were two of them, so they could come in. I hadn't cleaned the front room because I didn't expect them. But we sat down in the living room, and Craig said, the bishop said, can we sit at the dining room table? I was like, sure. I think he was just getting control of the situation, and so we're sitting, the three of us, at the dining room table, and he proceeded to tell me that I was living contrary to the teachings of the church and would I like to repent.
It's doing it all over again.
Mm-hmm. I said, another bishop's been here. We've done this. And
That's traumatic.
Well, he didn't finish the process, so we're...
Oh my gosh. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he didn't believe in it and didn't want to do it.
Maybe that's why he was released. I don't know. Or maybe it was just his time. Who knows? It would be nice to think that maybe he took a stand and was released. I don't know.
If you're that bishop and you're listening, reach out to us and give us a happy ending for that story. Okay.
Exactly. So Craig came in, little short guy, Napoleon complex. He loved his power, and he asked me if I wanted to repent, and I did. I looked at him and I said, I was so far removed from the church at this point that it was just so odd for me to have him ask me if I wanted to repent. And I said, frankly, Craig, and I purposely was calling him Craig through this whole thing, I don't have a need to repent. I'm in a place in my life where I feel stronger and closer to any sort of spirituality. My children are happy. I'm with a person I love. We have this home together. If I were to repent, as you say, I would no longer have any of that. I would not have my relationship with Susie. That would have to end. I'd also have to move out of this home because I wouldn't be able to afford it. I'd have to give up my time with my kids because I wouldn't be able to have a situation where they were able to come, comfortably. So no, I don't have any need to repent. And I said, and frankly, if I did feel a need to repent, it wouldn't be through you. And he just looked at his notes and kept reading. It didn't seem to flap.
He had a job to do.
He had a job to do, and he finished it up. What really bothered me about that was the kids were there. The kids were in the house. They were in the room next to us. I don't know what they could hear, what they were overhearing, what they felt. They were still active members at this time. They were still going to church, believing members. And here their moms in the next room being excommunicated. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. That was kind of insensitive. And he's the one that explained to me that because I don't hold the priesthood, there was no need for a court.
Oh, okay.
That they could just convene, and his counselors just could convene in their office and finish it up, and I'd be getting a letter. So then they left. The counselor was so uncomfortable through this whole thing. And I could tell he felt bad. He didn't say a word. And then they left. The next day, there was a plate of Christmas cookies on my porch at my front door from this counselor and his wife. He must have not felt good about the whole thing, but they brought me Christmas cookies. So it was, excommunication was a small price to pay.
For the cookies?
For the Christmas cookies, they were good.
And how did it make you feel to have been excommunicated by that point?
At that point, it was paperwork. I felt what my worries and concerns were for the kids. Because I wasn't taking any action myself to leave the church until the kids were older. I just didn't feel like they needed that sort of disruption in their life. Well, it wasn't important to me anymore. It was just paperwork. It was the church's business, not mine. I could care less if I was on their rolls or whatever. There was no stand for me to take at that point in time. But it did feel good to be done with it. I was just worried about the kids at that point.
Well, that's a perfect segue to kind of close out part one of this interview with Jill Searle and to transition to our interview with Katie Searle. And I'll just say that we did, for my PhD, we did research on outcomes for LGBT Mormons, and oddly enough, excommunicated LGBT Mormons had the lowest depression, highest quality of life, lowest sexual identity distress, lowest, homonegativity, and just overall happiest. So according to the data, they actually did you a favor by doing that.
Exactly.
But anyway, thanks for joining us for part one of this interview. We are now going to, don't go away. Come right back. Join us with Katie Searle. We're going to talk about her life, what it's like to grow up in this environment where your dad's an Orthodox Mormon. You have two moms that are lesbian. This is in the 90s. And then to go on to meet her husband, Nate, to start a globally world famous magazine called Kinfolk. And then we're going to talk about some really tough stuff, but also some empowering messages and stories about Katie's life from then forward. So thanks for joining us, and come right back for part two with Katie Searle. Thanks, everybody.